Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to my lovely interview today. We're working with Melany Oliver, who is a trauma survivor and a healer in her own right today. And we're going to be finding out some interesting things about her today. So please do subscribe if you want more content like this. So, Melany, hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. So you've got an interesting story. So you've had a bit of a tough upbringing, bit of pretty aggressive actually in some ways, and you are now a victor of it, and you've managed to turn your life entirely around, and now you help other people with their traumas. Is that fair enough? Fair to say?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so should we start with a little bit about your background and find out what actually happened to you and how you've actually used your techniques nowadays to become balanced
Sure.
and help other people? So,
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
lovely.
Yeah, would you like me just to share a little bit about my story, or do you have any specific questions? Do I get right into the
I think just get
the
right into it. I mean, I've
core
got
of it?
everything in front of me here, but yeah, just tell us your story. Let's start with that.
Sure. So I'm half Brazilian, half British. My father's English, my mother's Brazilian. I was born in Brazil. We lived there until I was about 5, but I actually was raised in Dubai in the UAE. And in my early years, I was abused by my mother, as I shared with you,
Hmm.
physically, emotionally, mentally. She was the main abuser. Um, yeah, it really impacted me, obviously, in a
Yes, it would.
negative way.
Yeah.
Um, and from that, I actually started to develop a lot of self-hatred, a lot of self-sabotage. I went to sort of drug addiction, alcohol, drinking, and toxic relationships and all of that. And it was really in my early teens that I started to look for healing.
Hmm.
So I was quite young when I started my journey, but I felt that I started doing all the wrong things
Right.
as a way to bypass dealing with the actual trauma.
Avoiding it,
Um,
yes.
yeah, so a lot of like energy healing and a lot of meditation and crystals and this, that, and the other, but not actually addressing the emotion, not actually processing the emotion. And I didn't realize that that was what was keeping me stuck for 10 years. So I always say that I spent 10 years on the spiritual path, and then I ended up more lost than when I started because nothing was working.
You need to get into the nitty gritty of it all. You need to get into the emotional
Correct.
stuff.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it can be a bit fluff and it can be
Yeah.
a bit of a distraction. Yeah, agreed.
And that's what I did, because also that I didn't know, nobody was teaching me that, and everybody was teaching me to do all the fluff, like you said, all the spiritual bypassing. And also it was actually a big part of my upbringing as well. So in Bahia, there's a lot of spiritual centers, and they're big into spiritismo. It's not the same as spirituality in the West. They have their own philosophy. They believe in the afterlife and energy and all of that. So because I was brought up, having my energy cleanse and going to see spirit doctors and witch doctors and things like that, in my head, that's what I thought healing was.
Right.
So that's why I ended up in the new age healing and sort of avoiding it, because in my mind that was healing, but then nothing, was working. And it was only until I started to really process my emotions, in particular from my childhood, and process all those traumas, that my life started to change, that I started to actually break patterns. And I stopped desiring to do drugs, for example. I stopped smoking as a consequence, as an effect of the healing, not because I wanted to stop, for
Smoking's
example.
an interesting one. So, in Chinese medicine, your lungs are related to grief. And so often, and smoking numbs you. So often
Correct.
people are smoking, often when people get stressed, they smoke very hard. And that's actually because sometimes the grief is rising within them and they're
Yeah,
actually trying to sort of stuff it down again. So there are
absolutely.
emotional smokers, and it's just, and what's also interesting as well, I find, it's a relationship with cancer and grief, because obviously lung cancer is very related to smoking, and smoking is extremely toxic. Don't recommend it, really
Yeah,
anti it. However, your lungs are related to grief in Chinese medicine. So
correct.
is it that you've got a lot of grief and so you're smoking to suppress the grief, Or is it that the cigarettes are giving you cancer? I'd say it was a combination. But it's
Yeah,
interesting that your lungs are responsible for grief, and suppressing grief is what the cigarettes will actually do for you. So if you've got
yeah,
rid of your grief, your need for the cigarettes might not be there. It might just be, oh, well, I don't have
yeah.
that problem. I don't, it's because you've had this difficult childhood. If that's not there, then your desire to smoking might be gone because of that, and it's a slightly different direction.
That's absolutely right. And that's what I realized, like, the more that I healed myself, the less desire that I had to engage in, for example, drugs. I have no desire anymore. Like, I don't, why would I want to do that to myself?
Uh-huh.
You know? Whereas before, obviously, it was an escape as well, not wanting to face reality, wanting to dissociate and numb myself, as you mentioned. So yeah,
Yeah, numbing is yeah, it's just an escapism. It's like, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to hide from it. And I think there are loads of different ways that you can do that. I mean, any sort of addiction, being a workaholic or any sort of,
totally.
yeah, it's
And even
avoiding
that,
it, and it's a void, and it's a disconnect as well from source. You're not connected. You're just like la 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 la, and avoiding feeling everything.
yeah, from source and from yourself, because you connect to yourself by feeling your emotions, so the more that you don't process your emotions, the more disconnected that you feel from yourself. And that's
Mhm.
why people, at least I speak for myself and a lot of the clients that come to me, they have everything on the outside to be happy, but they're so unhappy and disconnected from themselves, and they don't know what it is.
Mhm.
And it's a result of 30, 40 years of suppressing their emotions, basically.
I also think I think that's a huge part of it, but I also think that there is an element about not being of service and not being kind to other
Mm,
people. I think that if you are living a life which is selfish, or it's all about your personal gains or you in some way, you've isolated yourself. And I think helping other people and being part of a community and being community spirit and actually of service in some way fills you up. It's like when you give somebody a gift, and sometimes it's more fun giving someone a gift because you've chosen something specifically for
yeah,
them, and you give it to them and they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And it just fills you up. Like sometimes giving is nicer than the receiving. But I think that if you lived a life which is solely for you and your personal gains, or like very fixed in ego, which is unfortunately what the social media is doing to many people, it's very isolating. And then you
yeah.
become, more and more miserable. They have a Harvard study of happiness, which is fascinating. And they've looked at people for over 80 years in this study, and they say, what keeps you well? And one of the, they've looked at people in their 80s and they've managed to backtrack to people to their health in their 50s and see what the markers are for health in your 80s from a 50-year-old, because they've got them on study, because it was right from university, from Harvard. So they've got the students from freshmen up until their 80s and 90s. So they can actually
Wow.
look back and see what the signals are. So, you look at health in your 20s to your 80s and your 50s and whatever, and sort of see what things, but they've got everyone's records, all their medical records, all of their emotional records, all the things they
Wow.
interview them every 2 years. And they've interviewed their doctors, their friends, their family, their kids, their grandkids. It's a huge study. It's fantastic. So, what are the markers which look at health in your 80s? Now, we would assume that it would be to do with cholesterol and blood pressure and all of these,
Yeah,
these things which
correct. Yeah.
it's not. It is, in fact, about your sense of community, your happiness, and it's the happy people are well,
Wow.
and the miserable people are not well. It's
Makes
literally that.
sense.
And
Um,
being of service is a huge part of it. Being of service, being kind, having a sense of purpose, having a sense of community, and being in a healthy relationship. If you're in an unhealthy relationship, it's worse than being in no relationship at all. But it's just having friends and love and connection. That's what keeps you healthy.
wow, I didn't know that.
Mm.
It makes total sense. And also, like, I believe that we're here to learn about love, and it's about loving other people, like you said, being of service. But also, a lot of people that don't do that, that hide, it's a lot of the times is a trauma response, when you isolate yourself, right? You're scared of the world. This is what I did. I know, to cut myself off from everyone, and
Safer.
scared of people, yeah, it's safer. But
Being
then, like you
vulnerable
said,
is scary.
yeah, it is. It's not fulfilling. you know, and even you have to take a risk at some point. That's what I discovered on my journey. I had to, at one point, be vulnerable again and learn to trust people again, and learn who, and have discernment, who to open my heart to and who not to, and all of that.
And
But
that's
I think
listening
it's better.
internally. You know, discernment's difficult because we're divorced from our emotions, we're divorced from our feelings, we've outsourced our health to medicine. And then actually taking these things yourself and actually knowing and you know, trusting the wrong people and then getting messed around and all these different problems which happens. You know, learning discernment and learning to listen to your internal voice and knowing the difference between the devil on your shoulder and the angel on your shoulder speaking with you. You know, one of them causes you to have anxiety and it's nervous, and one of them is very, very calm. And that's when you're listening to your intuition. Intuition is calm. Anything which is negative, which is saying you're rubbish, you're never going to achieve this, like, which is really a bit of a bully, that's the devil on
Yeah.
your shoulder. The
Yeah.
calm, sweet, loving voice, that's the angel on your shoulder. And I think people have got muddled with that.
Totally. And the more emotional wounds that you have, the more muddled you will be.
The more devils there are in your head.
Yeah. And then you will think that that's your intuition. But what you're doing then is maybe you're avoiding doing things because of fear or whatever, but it's actually your emotional wounds driving your every decision and all of that. So yeah, the more that you do your inner work, I guess, the more that you will have that discernment and be able to see clearly rather than subjectively and, you know,
Well,
through the
the
wounds.
more they shut up, the more that negativity,
Yeah,
that trauma response, they just quieten. You
totally.
don't
Yeah.
necessarily, once you get to a stage, I don't have internal chatter. Like, I don't have that voice. I've got intuition or God or the angel or whatever people want to call it. I don't really have the negative chatter. My internal monologue shut off years ago. And I live in walking meditation. So it's really interesting. And I can shut that down for people. It's one of the exercises that I do sometimes
Oh,
when
nice.
I'm teaching people. I literally shut down their internal monologue, and it's just the good side of it rather than the negative side of it. And you can see the difference. I shut down the trauma response.
Wow. I remember when I had my very first ayahuasca experience. And the reason I'm sharing this because we're talking about the internal dialogue, and that was the time where I was doing all the new agey stuff and bypassing everything, and I actually thought I was quite happy and positive and like had no chatter. But when I had this experience, I actually heard my internal dialogue, and it was so negative, and it
Really?
was just constantly putting myself down. You know, look at you, who do you think you are? You're a piece of shit or whatever. It was
Wow.
just very negative, and it was through purging and doing through that experience I felt it shut off. But
Right.
I was shocked because I thought I was doing all the right things and meditating and all of that. So yeah, it's tricky to be able to actually, again, discernment about your inner chatter, you know, when you
Yeah.
have so many suppressed emotions and traumas.
Yeah, you need to just get through it. You need to dissolve all the traumas and,
Yeah.
you know, get to the stage where, or neutralize them. You need to be able to think about these shitty things that happen to you and feel at peace with them. Because all
Yeah.
you're doing is, you know, you're just hurting yourself. Anger is, you know, what did it, was a Buddhist quote about anger? I've completely,
You poison yourself with
poisoning
anger.
yourself. Thank you. It's drinking poison. Anger is drinking poison, expecting the other person to die.
Yes, correct. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. And then the more that you release these emotions, the less that your chatter and negative thoughts become. That has been my experience, at
They
least.
quieten. I
Yeah.
think it's actually, I think of it in a slightly different way to you. I think it's literally holes in your energy system, which are, you know, it's almost like you are, they're just lacerations in your system. And what happens is literal, I think multidimensional beings actually come in and get you. And I
Yeah, I
think
believe
that
that
they
too.
are the demon, I think they're literal demons basically that come in. And what it is a your trauma is a bullseye on your chest. And what they're doing is feeding from you. There's a loosh system, which
Yeah.
is fascinating. So loosh is emotional energy. So I think that there are these beings who are feeding on our emotional energy, and we're actually prey. So there, what's really interesting, there's a guy called Leonard Lewalski who David Wilcock speaks about, and he's seen how strands of DNA, when they're in a test tube and you project negative thoughts at them, anger and grief and whatever, the literal strands of DNA unravel, and photons, which are particles of light, are released out of them. And that's the loosh
Wow.
system that these beings feed upon. If you have positive, joyful, calm, lovely thoughts, your DNA strands actually ravel and heal, and then you're not leaking. So I think enlightenment is really about light cultivation, and the more light you have, the less you're leaking, and you become enlightened with more light because you're not leaking the photons, because you're not being fed on by these demons.
Yeah, no, I believe that. And this is something that when I used to do energy healing, this is something that I witnessed a lot, that, and it's not something that I necessarily shared with certain clients, only specific ones. Some people just freak out,
Yes,
and
sure.
that's not good, because then they feed off the fear, you know. It's the emotions that these entities get hooked onto.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that you heal these emotions, they can't hook onto you anymore. That the hole gets sealed as you process your emotions. This is what I saw. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the bullseyes are gone from your chest. Like when you can think about these traumas and just think about them in a calm fashion, then you becomes, it's so much nicer. You're just not triggered by things. And then unfortunately for us, I think what happens is when people drink alcohol, unless they've got a rock solid system. I drink alcohol, I love alcohol, but my system is rock solid, so I think what it does is it affects your aura, and your aura, or your shielding around your body, drops slightly, and then they go, right, dinner time, and they come in, and then they feed off you, and they trigger you, and they make you get paranoid or upset or overly animated and psycho potentially. And because they just got access that they don't previously have if you've not been drinking. So I think it's quite dangerous, people drinking, unless their energy systems are very, very strong. Me, it doesn't make any difference to, but if it did, then I wouldn't. I think it is a medicine, and I don't think that people are necessarily ready for it. And that's why people have tantrums, or all sorts of strange reactions they do when they drink. I used to live in London, and my goodness, the number of people on a Friday night screaming and like, Johnny, where are you? And just these, and it was like,
So it's not necessarily them, it's the spirit influence, and the spirits are feeding their own addictions, because they don't have alcohol, obviously, in the spirit release. I don't think they do, but from what I've heard from all the spirits that I've spoken to and engaged with.
And what I also find amazing with alcohol is, look at the words that we use for alcohol: spirits. Gin is called a spirit, which no one's really thinking about. And the other word we use is booze. Booze. We're not.
It's interesting. I'm not sure if it was Cindy Dale, but there's a book that I read, and I think it was her, but she was talking about the different entities that get hooked on with different spirits. There's actually different types of entities for different spirits, for different types of alcohol.
I can feel that. I feel that because there's a different drunk for different alcohols. Whiskey makes you fight, gin makes you cry. There are, there's always, what do they say, mother's ruin. It's gin, but it's always people just sort of, weeping. And, there are all these pictures of days of old from hundreds of years ago with someone with like a baby hanging off their breast, and them sort of in the street in a mess. It's mother's ruin. So it makes.
I've not heard of that.
What?
I've not heard of that. I'd never heard of that.
You've not heard of that? Yeah, it's called Mother's Ruin gin. Yeah. And then you've got whiskey's aggressive. People fight when they have whiskey. I think tequila's quite a good drunk. I think people are quite wild in tequila. But there are different alcohols that literally have. I used to be a tequila girl. I used to
really?
Back in the day, I had an agency of tequila girls, and tequila's actually relatively good. Everyone's quite fun and having a great time. But I think there are spirits and curses on these things as well. Some of them.
Yeah, I mean, me and alcohol never went. I was a vodka girl, but I couldn't. My body couldn't cope. I couldn't process it. I've drunk for about close to 10 years now, but
vodka and gin are the same thing, by the way. I've been to gin making workshops. So
All right.
I like gin, but they do to make vodka into gin. What they have the same sort of, often it's potato based like vodka is, but they have a blank spirit like a vodka, and what they do is they add botanicals to it. They add junipers and various different
Oh, wow.
botanical spices and things. It's actually
Didn't know
gin
that.
is flavored vodka.
Right. Interesting. But yeah, I totally believe that. Like I said, it's not something I speak about. It freaks people out, or people who are not sensitive, to, I can sense spirits a lot of the times. So I just try to focus on what they need to heal to unhook, the spirits, which is their emotions, basically.
Right. So what
Yeah.
techniques do you use then?
I don't really use techniques. It's just more like a coaching style and guiding them to actually feel their emotions. I help my clients develop their will, basically, develop their will to feel. And this has to come from your heart. And you have to be sincere. You have to want to know the truth. You have to have a deep desire to heal. Yeah, this is kind of like the work that I do now. I did use techniques in the beginning, but over time, as you start to heal yourself, you start to understand more about how the soul works. And really what I discovered, it's about desire. You have to really want to heal. And that's it. That's the key. And as long as you have that, and you're sincere and you're humble and you're willing to face your stuff, then that's all you need, really. Because then the emotions just naturally start to come up, and then you obviously have to face it and feel it and process it.
There is a level of bravery to this sort of work, because you do actually, you have to look at your past, and you have to look at what happened to you, and you have to choose not to be a victim of it. You have to choose to become
Yeah,
a victor of it and switch that narrative around, because unfortunately, a lot of people have very, very, very horrible things that have happened to them, and that is not uncommon. But if unless this is dealt with, then your past owns your future.
correct. Yeah, yeah. And most people don't realize how much it impacts their future. In particular, I just want to share that for me, I had physical trauma, so you can't deny that,
No.
right? But a lot of people that I work with, they suffer from emotional trauma. And it's very easy to deny emotional trauma.
Or
Oh,
to
they
be
didn't
gaslit
mean
out
it.
of it.
Or,
You
yeah,
can,
yeah,
yeah.
totally. And that's the tricky part, like
Mm.
really. And a lot of people are
Or,
scared to
and
point
yeah,
at.
you do.
Sorry, you're cutting off a little bit.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
With emotional trauma, because it's not physical, it's not tangible, it's easier to get away with it because you were just a child, or your parents did the best that they could. That's a classic, you know, excuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about accountability.
Yeah.
And also realizing that some things were not your fault. If there was some abuse at home when you were 5 years old, that was on your parents or whomever it
Yeah.
was. It's not on you. And, and as awful as it may have been, your healing is your responsibility.
Yeah. Uh, but that's the thing, like with accountability, a lot of people they don't want to point at their parents. But then the whole thing about emotional abuse is that you were conditioned and programmed to take on your parents' emotions, and that's where the hook is. That you're a bad, terrible, ungrateful daughter or person if you blame your parents, or if you point at what they did. Oh, then you're still resentful and you're not forgiving, or whatever it is.
Well, the other thing which I talk about, which I find awful, is unfortunately there is the law of attraction, and the law of attraction has a dark side as well as the one we're familiar with. But
Yeah,
basically, the whole thing is whatever you're thinking about, whatever's in your energy field, you attract. You're ordering it from the universe. Now, unfortunately, what many people do is order things they don't want. Now, if you've had something like maybe there was infidelity or some style of abuse or whatever it is in your home growing up, you are still, until you've neutralized it, until you've come
yeah,
to peace with it, you're ordering that for your future life because it's in your field. You've literally put the order into the universe for it. So unless you clear your past traumas, you're going to get more of the same thing. because the universe sees you ordering something and you not getting that, you have to clear it, otherwise you get more and more and more of it until it gets more and more aggressive. But the universe is like, oh, you really want that, great, you're focusing on it, great, we'll send you more of that. It doesn't have this positive negative polarity that we have, like that was terrible, but you focus on it, you get more of it. So
Yeah.
unless anyone heals, they are doomed to relive it in different ways. So healing in whatever makes sense to them needs doing, or you're just in for a world of pain ongoing.
Yeah. Or there's a saying, like, you either live your fate or you live your destiny. And fate is when you just, react to whatever life throws at you, which is based on, like you said, your past. If you've not cleared your past, you're going to live your fate. Whereas destiny is when you clear and you take responsibility and you see the universe or your law of attraction, whatever you want to call it, as feedback. Okay, I haven't healed this yet. Let me heal this. And, and that's how you sort of create your destiny. And it's more empowering. Whereas the fate, you're just, live in these negative patterns, and you'll never be able to break out of it if you're not, clearing the past. As you say clearing, I say processing, but anyway, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Feeling your emotions and releasing them, basically, so that you can change your law of attraction and actually have a potential to create what you desire.
Yeah, because you can, but you have to have it clean. It needs to be clean. If you're not clean, if you're focusing on so and so did such and such, or even on other people generally, you need to not be, the whole thing about one of the 10 commandments, that thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's ox, I know this steed, their neighbor's wife. I think oxen ox and horse, I think, were ahead of wife, if I remember my 10 commandments vaguely. But it's like coveting other people or looking over your shoulder at them, or just, coveting is wanting what they have, wanting it their life and go, why has she got that? I deserve to have more and more. If you're spending your time looking at other people rather than building your own, then you're going to be miserable, and it's going to be much harder for you to build things.
Yeah, totally. But I also find, I'm not sure if you've seen this as well, I guess maybe it's just because I work with a lot of people who are just in the beginning of their journey, right? And they have no idea why they're repeating negative patterns. And one thing I just want to point out is, when we suppress emotions, which we all do from our childhood, I'm not just like we all do it, we cut off awareness to that trauma, and we cut off awareness to those events. So that's why a lot of people don't remember what is stored within. They don't remember that they're still angry at their father, or they don't remember that they think that they're over it because they don't feel it in that moment. But like you said, you can see whether you're over something or not by your law of attraction. Where your triggers are a classic example of what you still hold inside you, the wounds that you're trying to defend, inside of you.
100%. They are neon signs. What do you get triggered by? We should really, and this is, I'm pretty good at it, but I'm not perfect at this. We should be able to, in most situations, behave with grace and dignity. If someone does something, even if someone does something like a dick move towards us in whatever capacity, we should be like, that's a real dick move. And not go, you blah, 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 and get really upset
basically.
about it. Yeah, and just go lose our minds about it. We should be able to go, well, that's pissed me off. Right, and how do we fix this? How do we move forward? Rather than sitting there and festering about what a victim we are, about whatever might have happened.
And what they did wrong.
What they did wrong. And obviously it's very important to have boundaries and to not hang around with assholes. Let's just not do it. There's no need to be doing it. You can't necessarily change other people's behaviors. You can change your reaction to it, and you can change whether you're actually around them or not. You can't change them necessarily. That's on them, not on you. So, don't hang around with the people who are abusive. Or it does change when you have cleared your traumas. They tend not to be abusive in the same way, because they're not having to live out this act this
Yeah.
show, this pantomime for you to show you that you still have something around loss, to show you something around grief or abandonment or rejection or betrayal. They tend not to do it to you anymore because that karmic, you know, contract is then gone. And if they keep doing it, maybe, you know, get a different friend set or something. You know, you just don't want to be around people who are very negative because it just will pull you down.
Or if you do tend to attract that, to see what is it in me
Mm-hmm.
that is attracting that. Where do I still need to heal that in me? Like, what wound in me is attracting
Yeah.
this
So
person? Because like you said, when you do heal that and you clear that, then you, at least from my journey, you tend not to attract those types of people anymore. And when you do, when they're around, they will sense that you won't take their bullshit basically
yeah.
anymore, and you'll have stronger boundaries naturally.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think it's interesting to know, like, if you've just had one friend from childhood who's just a bit of a wally or whatever, is it just that one friend from childhood that you just kept going because of whatever? And if it's an anomaly, you've got one friend who's just a bit difficult, then it might just be that person. If you keep attracting the same style of abuse from multiple people, that's on
Yeah,
you, honey bunny.
that's definitely a pattern.
But it does make a difference. Sometimes we do hold on to people that possibly we shouldn't.
Yeah, especially family, I find. You know, family are the
How's your
hardest.
relationship with your family now you've healed? Do you still speak with them? And
My mother, no, I don't speak to her. I had to cut her out, sadly. My father's not speaking to me at the moment. My brother, I'm on good terms with my brother. It took 4 years, but a few months back, he reached out and we had a good chat, and we're starting a new relationship, which I'm really happy about. Um, my sister, we haven't really talked about. I don't talk to her too much, but she's respecting more of my boundaries now. So yeah, but my parents and the whole of my mother's side of the family don't speak to me.
oh, really?
Yeah, apart from a cousin or two that I speak
Have you
to,
called
but
her
yeah,
out on her abuse then? What
yeah, I had
happened?
to. Yeah,
Right.
I had to, and I had to set boundaries. And basically, it was the whole classic toxic family dynamic. You know, they all attacked me and told me that I'm, you know, the
Oh,
one that's playing the victim, and basically protected her. And what was interesting about that was that all of them witnessed her abuse towards me. So it wasn't, they knew that I wasn't making it up. So that was very interesting. And nobody
good.
asked me how I was doing or why, or they just started accusing me of all sorts of things and making up stories. And she started making up stories about me as well. So yeah, and I just kept saying the same thing. I'm happy to talk about this, but it has to be based on love and respect. I will not tolerate abuse. And I just had to do that over and over again until a point where I said, I can't, like that, this is it. We can talk about it like adults without all these accusations, or, you know, I'm going to have to just cut you out and carry on with my life.
Yeah, it takes courage to do
Yeah.
that. I mean, all of this
Yeah.
confronting people, it's a courageous thing, and even them admitting that your mother wasn't perfect, you know, that,
Yeah.
and also their culpability in it. There is a level of their culpability in it, because if they admit that they saw your mother being abusive towards you and didn't do anything about it, that's on them as well. They didn't speak to her, they didn't try to alter her behavior, they didn't protect you in any way. So they've then got to be courageous in their own right to say, I fucked up too.
Yeah. They had to look at themselves.
And
And
that's
obviously
not
they
nice.
don't
And
want to
so if
do
you
that.
just go la 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 la, it's a lot easier. No, you're the problem. You know, if
Yeah.
you're the problem, then they don't have to look at
I
their
am
own
the
behavior.
problem. But, you know, and I just want to point out, like, I had a good upbringing other than the abuse. And I'm saying this mainly because a lot of clients also that come to me say, oh, yeah, my parents beat me, but, you know, they gave me everything. And
Right.
I went to a good school. My father was a good provider. Even my mother, you know, took me to ballet 3 times a week, did the whole mother thing. But that still doesn't excuse
Right.
the abuse. And I just want to point that out because that's what people do. And that's why a lot of people don't heal.
Yeah.
I think that's an important point. And this is when I got to a point in my journey. You say it's a difficult decision. Yeah, it took me 7 years to make that decision. And I tried everything. I tried to speak to her. I tried to get her to go to counseling. I tried Like, I tried everything. I did everything. And it got to a point where I cannot allow abuse anymore in my life. That's it. I cannot. Because it means that I'm being unloving to myself,
Yeah.
and I will
And
not
that's the
allow
thing,
that.
when you're actually trying to keep the peace, which people talk about, you're actually making it, you're making a war internally. So you might be keeping the peace externally, but it's building, and that's why often people suddenly, react very strongly over something relatively minor, because it's this build up of various different things over quite a long period of time.
Yeah.
And you're never keeping the peace, because if there's war, there's war. It's just who's absorbing the bloody war. Are you taking it
Who's
on?
sacrificing? Yeah. And it was me all the time. It was always my fault. I was the one that's taking on the abuse. And then it just got to a point where enough is enough, and I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
As sad as it is, but I had to choose myself. Or as selfish as it is, you might call me selfish, but I had to
No, I
choose
think
myself.
everybody needs to, and I think they do, in all different relationships, need to choose themselves, and I just don't think people do. I think I've got a few friends in marriages they shouldn't be in, because they're staying together for the sake of the children, and I can understand that in some capacity, and I think it is a beautiful thing. However, and it's a very, it's a selfless act. I think it is beautiful, and maybe it would be harder to provide for them, but if they're in an abusive relationship, the kids know that they're not happy, and the kids
Yeah.
ultimately want them to be happy, and it will ultimately destroy their health. It will
And I
ultimately
feel that the
destroy their
kids will
health, because it
feel
will
it.
get stuck in emotional patterns. Yeah. And the kids will actually get sick because the parents are bloody miserable. It's not, and it's no good. My parents stayed together far too long, and I was begging them to get divorced because they were bloody miserable, and my mom was just so angry at my dad, and would just storm out the house, and she was, and was staying together for the sake of the children. It wasn't until I finished my A levels that they told me they were getting divorced. They'd literally stayed together to get me through my exams, and whilst I was going, bloody get divorced.
You just knew, like, children
Well,
know, they're
well,
not
I mean, no.
stupid.
My mum was very, very upset, and it was a very, it was difficult at home because of that. And we didn't. She would, something small would trigger her, and she would go and drive off and go and sit in her car and just try to sort of breathe through things, and was very upset. But it was, living in an angry home. It's not
Yeah.
good for the children, no matter how beautiful
No.
and big and gorgeous the house is. It's not really about the house. It's about the happiness in it.
I think it's a false belief that people have, and I believe that it will be better for the kids if the parents did, let's say in this case, get a divorce. At least they'll be happy,
I think so.
and I think that will be healthier for the kids. But that's just my humble opinion.
I think so too. And and I've got several friends in that situation, and I just wish they would go and get divorced. But then again, I suppose being they are parents. So I suppose it is very tough being the single parent. But I also think
Mm.
that I've got some other friends who are divorced or separated, and they have sort of a week with the child and a week without the child, that sort of, or however
Yeah,
it works for them. And I actually
arrangement.
think that's pretty bloody healthy, because they've actually got time to themselves to get on with all the things that they want to do, and go out and socialize and have the life which isn't just solely devoted to the children, which is a lot of what people do as parents. Is very sacrificial some of the time. And actually
Yeah,
having a week on and a week off, I think they get better quality time with their children and as parents, and then they get to fulfill their own dreams too. I actually think that that is pretty good for quite a lot of the families that I
yeah.
know who are in that situation.
I actually agree. Yeah, I agree. I'm actually coaching a lady I've coached her out of a toxic relationship, and she's currently in the process of negotiating this split. Yeah, much healthier, and the kids are happier. And like you said, she's now spending quality time with the kids and not perhaps taking her anger out on the kids or something like that,
And just being snappy, it can be
Yeah,
as much as being snappy because you're overwhelmed, and if you're if you're around someone that you don't like, because it does turn to hatred at some point.
yeah,
And then you see them, and it just makes you seethe with anger, and it's unmanageable, and you're sleeping next to somebody that you just want to punch in the face, but you're staying together for the sake of the kids.
that's not healthy.
It's not good, and it will destroy you. It will eat away at you, and you are not keeping the peace. You're keeping the war inside. That's the difference.
Yeah,
And I think it will ultimately destroy your health.
yeah, I agree.
Mm.
Yeah, I've seen that too with myself as well, how emotions affect, your health. But that's another topic that people also don't believe in so much. They think it's
Emotions
something
cause diseases.
external, but it's actually, I believe it's internal. It's like you said, you created a war within yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and it's now your cells are attacking yourself, you know?
You're building a disease. I actually have worked out what diseases are. So diseases are suppressed traumas or stagnated traumas. So basically all we do is we get fixated on something. And that, so when you hang around somebody who's sad or angry or depressed, you spend 2 seconds with them, you can feel it. It makes you feel anxious being around an anxious person, or
Yeah.
sad being around a depressed person. Or you walk into a room and there's been an argument, you go, oh, what's
You can
happened in
feel it in
here?
the air. Yeah.
Or the other side of it, a more pleasurable side of it, is if someone's just had sex and you can feel it. You're like, oh, what happened to you last night? You can just feel it, right? You can feel it in the air around them.
Yeah.
So emotion is an energy, and it's a gas that hangs around people. It literally follows them around. A depressed person will literally suck the air out of the room. So emotion is energy, and emotion is a gas. So what happens is diseases come in 3 categories: a gas, a liquid, or a solid. Gas-based diseases are thought-based diseases. Liquid-based diseases, think about chronic pain. Sometimes it's a 2 out of 10, sometimes it's a 10 out of 10, sometimes it moves. It's not in the same location all the time. So you've got that. You've got something like a blood-based disease or immune-based disease, which is a liquid-based disease, or a cyst. Cyst is a ball of fluid. And how do you get from a gas, from like water vapor to liquid water? It's to do with how much space that they've got and how compressed
Wow.
it is. Yeah.
How interesting. I've not heard this concept before.
I invented this. This is my grand
That's
theory
awesome.
of disease. I've come up with this. It's true. It's great. And I want everyone to know it, because this is what diseases are, and I've come up with it, and it's just the most important thing for everyone to know, and no one knows it. So what happens is, so you get fixated, you think about these anger, or whatever it might be, and that's that gas, and it into a confined space. Where that space is and what that disease presents as depends on the quality of your thoughts. Back pain is about not feeling supported. Lungs, grief. We said about these things, anger is the liver, various different places. So it's that you get fixated thinking about something, and that just densifies because it runs out of space. So it cools down for
I like that.
For water vapor to become water. So for it to become liquid water, it's just that. It's just it runs out of space and it cools down. So then a solid-based disease, think about a tumor. Tumor's a solid, you press a tumor, it's a rock. How does the liquid water go to frozen water? Ice, condensing. It gets smaller, doesn't it? So more of that gas, more of those thoughts can get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
Wow.
It's a solid-based disease. So cancer, everything is caused by you getting fixated on whatever it might be over the course of years, and it just it needs to go somewhere. So it goes to form that tumor there, or that problem there, or that problem there. It's just thoughts densified. That's what diseases are.
I like that. I wrote a blog on because I also believe the same, by the way. I believe that diseases and conditions are a result of unhealed emotional trauma over years. And so for me, like disease, the manifestation of disease, that shows how much denial you are in, because it can take years for the disease to manifest, right? It doesn't just manifest overnight.
It's matter. Thoughts have matter, which no one has considered. Thoughts have matter, and that matter has to go somewhere. Unless you're purging
it has to go somewhere.
Capacity, it will just densify and form whatever disease you have. And I've got a textbook. It's called Metaphysical Anatomy, which is fantastic, and it tells you the emotional reasons behind every disease.
Yeah, I've got a few as well. Different one, not that one.
That's the one that I use, and it's my go-to by a lady called Yvette Rose, available on Amazon, and it's brilliant. It's precise, and what I do for my work is read the text and dissolve the resonance with everything that with the disease. And sometimes diseases drop out instantaneously.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, I've had experiences where, like one of my last ones, I had eczema. I've never had eczema in my life. It just developed in my 30s. And anyway, it manifested, and it took about 6 months because I couldn't figure it out. And when I actually managed to sit through it and process it, what it turned out to be was anger at myself, as well, self-hatred, actually, it was, I think. And as soon as I got it, and as soon as I processed it, it healed overnight.
Yeah.
Like my skin started healing, and the pain stopped, and then the skin started healing. It basically overnight it healed.
Yeah, I had someone with psoriasis years ago, and I worked out there was a trauma he had when he was 13 years old, and I asked him about it, and he said his friends set upon him and beat the bejesus out of him, and his girlfriend was watching and hospitalized him, and that heartbreak caused him to have psoriasis for 20 years or 15, 20 years or whatever it was, and we neutralized that trauma in his system, and it was gone in 5 days, and it was everywhere. Yeah.
Awesome.
And it takes 28 to
I love
31
it.
days officially to heal, to get new skin, and it was gone in 5 days. And it was everywhere. It was thick, real leathery, difficult, very painful sore skin.
Wow. Yeah. And yeah, I totally believe that. I've worked with a number of clients that had, physical conditions, and like you, I focus on the emotions. And once we process the emotions, the conditions just disappeared, stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to be finishing up in just a minute. Are any other words of wisdom you'd like to give to our beautiful audience today?
The only thing I always say is that, healing doesn't happen in your head. It takes place in your heart. A lot of people try to process their emotions in their head, and it's not about analyzing it or intellectualizing it. It's really about just feeling it and accepting that truth in your heart, because trauma is just when you are in denial. Suppressed trauma, like for years. Obviously, as a child, you don't know, but as an adult, you have the choice to accept that truth in your heart. And trauma really is about accepting what happened to you. That's it. And you accept what happened by feeling those emotions in your heart and your body. And yeah, my point is, healing doesn't have to be complicated. It's simple. It's just a heart-based process, not an intellectual one.
Yeah. Writing notes for my little write-up. Perfect. Okay, my darling. Well, thank you, Melanie. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to my lovely audience today. And yeah, it's been very interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for sharing me your little analogy and your concept.
Yeah, it's right.
It's right. It feels right. And it's the way that you came up with this, I don't know, but it's perfect. It makes total sense.
Well, actually, I'll tell you a bit more about it before we close. Just to give our audience a little bit more. I was about to stop the recording, but I'll keep going. Okay, so everything comes in this way. Everything that exists in the world comes from a gas to a liquid to a solid. Think about it. Okay, my pen, for example. How does this come from manifestation? Someone thinks it up. Right, I'm going to make this red pen, and then they draw it in some way. So they draw it on a liquid screen, or they draw it with a pen with a liquid. So it goes from a gas to the thoughts to a liquid stage. Sometimes that's missed out, and then they manifest it into the physical. Everything in existence goes from a gas to a liquid to a solid, including the way, if you believe the creation story of God. He thought it up and created it in this way. Everything in existence goes from a thought to a plan to a manifestation. Everything. So it makes perfect sense to be doing that. And if you can do that, if you can really get mastery of it, you can do it into manifestation. You'll be able to go gold bar, boom, gold bar. So if you get mastery of gas, liquid, solid, solid, liquid, gas, you can do instant healing of every disease, or you can do instant manifestation of anything. It's the same process. Mastery of that's what Jesus had. And you can do anything that you want. So it's real. That is it's enlightenment, really. If you get true mastery of gas, liquid, solid, solid, liquid, gas, you're enlightened, because you can instantly heal all diseases and instantly, manifest anything, which are two of the siddhis, which are very, very advanced, and you won't have any diseases. So that's what I would call enlightenment, because you can only get there once you've already done the processing, and you haven't got these blooming demons feeding on you, and your system is strong enough to be able to do it. And you've cultivated and grown your system to the point to be able to do that naturally. That's what I would call enlightenment. You will be full of light at that juncture and be able to use light to manifest things.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And thank you for having me as a guest.
Thank you. All right, my darling, thank you very much. I'm going to turn off the video.